So today is Monday, February 29th, and we are in our 6th week of class. Next week, you guys are going to get your midterm assignment. So I've already kind of dropped little hints to some of you guys about what you should consider doing. Your midterm assignment is going to be a tutorial. You're going to learn something that you have never learned before, okay? You're going to teach yourself a skill. And by teach yourself, I mean you're going to use all of the resources available to you. We have the index, we have the internet. You guys can Google and try to like dive deep into anything you want. So I'll get into more details with that assignment next week, but I want you guys to start thinking as you're working, what's something that you want to learn more of? What have you been kind of hung up on in the past? And then you can, take notes and try to figure out what it is you want to do your tutorial on, okay? Anything. It could be anything in any of the softwares we use. So it can be something in InDesign, Illustrator, or Photoshop. Or even Acrobat Pro if you guys want to do that. All right, so this week you guys are going to get a lecture on color, and then you're going to get your color poster assignment, which is a fun one. And you're also going to get a small exercise on image size, resolution, and royalty-free images on the web. So this is a big one because I want you guys to be able to understand how resolution works and the idea of sampling and resampling images, okay, which means that if you start with an image that's too small and you have Photoshop add extra pixels in, we've talked about this a little bit in class, it will use an algorithm to throw little pixels into the image to make it have a higher resolution. But when it does that, it looks kind of fuzzy, okay, so we're going to play around with how you can make sure the image that you pull on the internet, from the internet, is high enough resolution, or when you're working with images, how you can figure that out in Photoshop. So how many of you have ever opened Photoshop before? Okay, so about half the class. So we're going to have that kind of going this tonight too, is playing around in Photoshop a little bit. All right, so any questions about where we are in the semester, the assignments, any of that kind of stuff? So let's talk about color. We've dabbled in color a little bit because we played with Adobe Color on our first exercise, the skateboarder exercise, right? So we got to see a color wheel. And we also got to play around with some color relationships because in that color wheel, in Adobe Color, it has some presets. So what's a monochromatic color palette? All one color. Right? Because we did that for our last assignment. So we're you guys are building up, and this is going to be a little bit more in depth, and you're going to focus more on color relationships for your next assignment. Okay, so color is a property or a description of light energy, and it's only with light that we actually see color, which is a little bit interesting to comprehend. So when you're looking at something, the molecules that make up any sort of material, some of them absorb certain wavelengths of light and reflect others, and that's how we see the colors that we see. So in some animals on this planet, like insects for instance, they have the ability to see light on the spectrum that we can't, so ultraviolet light. So if you were to look at a flower under UV light or with a special camera, you can see extra patterns often within a flower kind of surrounding the center, and that helps guide a bee or a butterfly to the center of a flower, for instance, but we can't see those wavelengths, our eyes can't process it, so we don't see those colors, which is kind of an interesting concept. So reflected light, the colors we see on the surfaces and objects in our environment are perceived and are known as reflected light. All right, so color as a design element. It is a characteristic of the other basic elements of design that we're learning in class, like format, line, and shape. And it's a really complex element because it has a lot of influence on your design and what direction your design is going in. And its potential to communicate is very vast. So when it comes to color, you can think about all the different color systems that are available to you, and you can think about color as actually having like an emotional impact on your piece. So we have certain associations with certain colors, right? So I'm going to shout out a color, and maybe you guys are going to give me kind of an association or an emotion with it, okay? Pale blue. Babies, okay. Baby boy. Red. Anger. Okay. Green. Envy. Environment. Money. Yellow. Happy. Sunshine. Yeah, exactly. So we start to already have these associations with color, and those can be applied to our design to help communicate our message. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the qualities of color, and I've gone through this a little bit before. But hue is the color itself, okay? So when I talk about the hue, I'm referring to yellow or green or blue, right? It's kind of like the given name to the color. And then the value is how light or how dark that color is. So if you have a really, really bright yellow, maybe that's a lighter value. And this area here, this black area, would be a darker value, right? So sometimes when we're looking at color, the hue actually stands out a little bit more than the value. So it might be more eye-catching. So you might see the yellow first because the spectrum of light that falls within yellow, our eyes are really sensitive to it. So that's why you see neon yellow signs for crosswalks and stuff, because our eyes are really, really susceptible and can really spot the yellow. And almost like that bright yellow-green too. But what happens is yellow, even though it's eye-catching, it may actually have the same value, how light or how dark it is, of, say, a pale gray next to it. So when we're designing, we have to think about, is the value enough contrast in addition to that hue? And I'll show you guys some examples as we start to go through the semester and we look at our work, because it kind of pops up often where you see a bright yellow or a pale green, for instance. It might be really eye-catching, but it's next to a pale gray, so there's not enough pop in terms of the contrast. So the other thing to think about is the saturation, or how intense the color is. And it's at its most intense when it has no other colors, no other pigments, no light or dark mixed in. So it's pure. So think about, you get a paint tube and you just squirt that right out onto your palette. That's a pure, highly saturated color. But once you mix anything else with it, you start to dilute that saturation. If you mix black with it, okay, if you mixed another color with it, and if you mix a color opposite on the color wheel, you actually start to get a diluted saturation and you will get like a muddy gray color. Okay. And the other thing that we talk about is temperature. So how cool or how warm a color is. And then it actually starts to get a little bit complicated with certain colors on the color wheel, because you might have a red, but it could be leaning more towards blue, and that's a cooler red. Or a yellow that's leaning towards green, that's a cooler yellow. So let me pull up this Adobe Color for you guys so I can showcase what I mean. So even though we might associate red or orange with warmth, you could start to lean towards a cooler color spectrum. So you can see here's bright red, but as we start to go a little bit cooler towards blue, we start to get more pink. And as we start to get a little bit warmer towards yellow, it gets a little bit more orange. And same with yellow right here. This yellow-green, much more cool than, say, this orange-yellow, right? So you can use that to your advantage when you're designing. Okay. So Tom's going to talk about lithographic printing tonight. So this is actually an interesting thing to talk about. Process colors, right? So when we talk about printing in the world of graphic design, we have two different types of colors that we tend to print, okay? You have your process colors, which are called CMYK. Does anybody know what CMYK stands for?
Cyan, magenta, yellow.
K is usually people think it means black, and it represents black, but it stands for key, which is the key plate. And Tom will probably show you a video that he always shows, and he talks a little bit about it, but that's one type of printing. Okay, and then you have your, or that's one type of ink color option, and then you have your spot colors, also known as your Pantone matching system colors, abbreviated to PMS. Okay, so the PMS colors are individual inks that are pre-mixed, so you can always get a perfect match. And I talked about that a little bit last week when we were doing critique. Let me see if I have a sample. This I might have this. All right. Well, what you do is you end up getting a book. Let's see if I can pull this up for you guys to see. It's a book of color swatches, almost like paint chips when you go to like Home Depot. And you guys have probably heard of Pantone's Color of the Year and that sort of deal. But this is what the books look like. They're these little chips of color. And if you were to go into your system, into Illustrator or InDesign, you can pull up an exact code and use this for your design. And then when you send it to the printer, they know to use this exact shade of PMS ink. Okay, or yellow or green. They have inks that are metallic or bright neon because you can't get those with the CMYK process. And the reason why you can't get super bright neons or metallics with CMYK is because you're only using those 4 color inks. And when they mix together and they kind of rotate around when they're printing, they make up all of the colors that you see in a photograph. Okay. So when Tom comes, he might have some samples for you guys. Sometimes he has his loop, which is like a little magnifying glass, and he'll lay it down and you can see all the little tiny dots of ink that make up all of the different colors, okay? So that's why when we talk about resolution for printing, we talk about DPI, or dots per inch, because there's these little teeny tiny dots of ink that actually go down onto the paper. Okay, what else? Okay, so let's talk about color relationships, because this is going to be important for your next assignment. And you guys can watch these videos in the lecture. I encourage you to watch those, but I'm going to save time tonight and not go into them. But in Adobe Color, we have some preset options for you to play around with. So if you click on any of these options, it will give you a set of colors to use, and then you can manipulate them with it. So analogous, that's how you pronounce it. These are colors that are close to one another on the color wheel. Okay, this is a great color palette for something where you really want to focus in on a really specific feeling, or maybe you have a subject that really lends itself nicely to an analogous color palette, like a nature scene, or for oranges and reds, you could see something really cool with the desert, right? And then you have monochromatic, which is one color, and you have tints and shades. And then you have a triad. They're equal distance apart 3 ways on the color wheel. So you can see how the color relationships, they kind of have a nice energy about them. Okay. All right, complementary always has the most striking energy between the 2 colors, especially if you set them next to each other, because they're completely opposite on the color wheel. So you can see how they both just pop when they're next to one another. If you were to mix 2 complementary colors together, you get a gray, brown, muddy, neutral color. And you have tints and shades, and compound is not one of the most traditional ones, but it's something that you can play around with. Okay. So for our color poster assignment, you guys are going to be playing around with color relationships. So just like in all the other assignments that we've had so far, you're going to start in your journal, and you're going to start with your sketches. Okay. So you guys have been, I've been starting to grade your assignments. If you guys haven't noticed that yet, check back at your assignments, because I may have left you a note So if you don't have your evaluation checklist uploaded, I might let you know. Or maybe you're missing a piece. Okay, so if you're missing a little something to your assignment, I'm going to let you know so you have a chance to redo it. Get a higher grade if you want to. But you also want to really make sure that you're doing this exercise portion of the assignment, because some of you guys haven't been digging down into every element. So you're going to start by playing around in your journal and looking for printed examples of color schemes: monochromatic, analogous, and complementary. You're going to search for samples of color used in graphic design, advertising, packaging, photography, whatever you want. Cut them out, paste them in your sketchbook, okay? And then you're going to find an example of a two-color design that uses screen tints to achieve a multi-color effect. So what I mean by that is maybe you're going to find a one-color design, but it's going to use mixes of white or black to create something that looks like it's made up of a lot of different colors. Okay. And then you're going to find a duotone, a tritone, and a halftone image. Duotone means it's made up of two different colors. Tritone is 3. And halftone effects are the dots, like what Jessie had in her assignment, where we had the magnaphone, right? And it's made up of all these little dots. So maybe you look online and you try to find some examples, okay? Or you look in some magazines, whatever you have on hand. All right, and then you're going to use a program such as Photoshop. Find a color photographic image of your own or download one, okay, that has a whole range of color, full color spectrum, okay? So I want you guys to start looking at the differences, start looking at the emotions that these different colors convey, how you can create a wide range of looks and feels using these different relationships. So you're going to put that all in your sketchbook to start. Then what you're going to do is you're actually going to prepare 2 color posters for this assignment. And the idea is that you're going to take the same imagery and you're going to duplicate it, but you're going to play around with 2 different color palettes and see how different those posters look. So you're going to have 2 final posters with 2 different color palettes. The subject for your poster has to be a famous person, place, or thing. So that can be basically anything that's famous or well known. So Paris, or Gwen Stefani, or a movie, or like a food like Oreos, or something that's really, really iconic. Whatever you want. It could be anything. It could be Half Dome. It can be a car. It can be an artist. Whatever you want. And how you feature it is up to you. I just want you guys to start to think creatively outside of just using a photographic image. I want you guys now to start thinking about starting in your sketchbook and drawing out your ideas, finding the idea that you like, and then executing it. Versus the other way, which students tend to do in the beginning, and it's okay. It helps give you like a little bit of a path. And that is if you were to go online and you find an image of the Eiffel Tower, and then you just completely replicate that Eiffel Tower. I want you guys to start thinking, what can I do to add to that Eiffel Tower? So maybe while you're working, you start sketching out some thumbnail sketches, and what you really want to do is focus on the essence of the Eiffel Tower, or maybe you're at the top of the Eiffel Tower and you have this whole view of Paris down below. Maybe it is actually like some sort of funky pattern, okay? Or maybe the Eiffel Tower is far into the distance and instead you have like a whole sea of city. But what you're also going to incorporate is a word into your design. Think of something that's going to also help enhance your communication of what it is you're trying to get across. So instead of just saying Paris or Eiffel Tower as the word. Think about something that's going to add to your design. So this poster right here, this is a Beatles poster for, it kind of looks like it reminds me of that Cirque du Soleil, Love. You guys ever heard about that? It's like all to Beatles music. So, you know, they chose to use the word love as a part of their design instead of saying just the Beatles, okay? So you're going to start sketching out these ideas, and you're going to do your thumbnail sketches, and you're going to really play around, and you're going to try to find a word that's going to go with your design. It's going to enhance your design. It's going to enhance the emotions and what you're trying to communicate. But you also have to think about what kind of typeface or font you're going to use in your final design. And that also has to mesh well with what you're trying to communicate. So you can see this student right here found this font. It kind of looks like Sanskrit a little bit, and it tied it nicely for this image of Buddha. I'm not sure what this is. Anybody know what this is? I never found out. But you can see whoever that was, it was like this this guy's hitting like this major idea. Boom. Mind blow. Okay? Or passion. And you can see the rest of this design is very like loose painterly almost, right? The shapes are very kind of abstracted. And so the font that they found was a thicker, more hand-drawn or marker maybe looking font that would go with that. Okay, so what I want you to do, pay close attention to integrating the typography with the image. What happens a lot of time is that you guys will come in and you'll start to lay out your design. But I want you to think about how you can start to incorporate your word as well. So if it's, let's see, if we think about Harrison, when we think about romance, maybe we incorporate romance into the shape of the Eiffel Tower. Or maybe if we're thinking about, let's see, what's something else that's famous? Anything? Somebody who's famous. How about Donald Trump? Maybe with Donald Trump. Let's see, I was watching a funny clip about him from John Oliver's show. Did you see that? So funny. Okay, so maybe for Donald Trump, it's all about his hair, and maybe the hair is like what you kind of are, you know, incorporating. Or maybe it's a scary movie or a scary book, so you incorporate the word dark and heavy at the bottom of your page. So I want you guys to think about how you're going to incorporate this word or phrase. I recommend that you stick with one word. You don't use a paragraph or a sentence. Try not to use a phrase because it starts to get more complicated. And then when you guys are working, you're going to then think about your color palette. So what are the directions that you want to take your poster in? And I have some students who cannot decide once they've been working, and so they do like 10 different versions because they want to see what happens. Last semester I had a student, she brought in 5 different options, and the class was like, ooh, which one do we like? And they had huge range of emotions and what people took just from a switch in the color palette where everything else stayed the same. So think about using 2 different color palettes. You can create them in Cooler. I want to see your process. So let me see your color palette, screen capture that, save it. Then you're going to drop it into your write-up later. So you can use complementary, monochromatic, analogous, whatever you want. If you use a compound one, that's fine. Just document and show to me that you're choosing these colors and why you're choosing them. And then you can be as realistic as you want, or you can try to be a little bit more arbitrary and choose colors that are a little bit more out there. I mean, purple and green is not really the most common color scheme to represent Buddha, right? Maybe we think of earthy colors or something, but it works, right? It has a calming effect. It looks like it's peaceful. So those are things you can play around with when it comes to your color palette. So arbitrary color, just so you guys know, means it's like not necessarily a realistic color scheme. So you could have a green sky and you could have purple grass or whatever it is that you want. So after you create your first poster with your first color palette, then you're going to take that poster and you're going to create the second color palette and you're going to create an entirely different mood with those colors. So play around with your personality and the personality of the design and see what kind of changes you're going to end up with. Okay, let's see. Make sure you capture your color palette and try to stay true to your color palette while you're working. Okay. And then I want you guys to give me a description of your color palette in your narrative. I want you to tell me what this color palette represents. What does it mean to your design? And then you're going to PDF everything into one package. You're going to upload it, and then you're going to bring your printed 2 color posters to class in 2 weeks. So I recommend that we all work with nothing smaller than 11 by 17, which is this size. Okay? Because it's a poster. It's not a little bitty booklet. It's a poster. It's meant to be eye-catchy. So think about your format. Think about the words you use, how it's incorporated, because it is a poster piece. It's not meant to be something that's viewed necessarily really, really small and up close. Okay. So any questions so far? If you want to go bigger, you can do 22 inches by 28 inches, which is like, I think it's this size right here. You can see how that would have a lot of impact. But I recommend that if you print that, you call up a few different print places in town first and you see what their options are and what the cost is going to be. Okay. So what to include? I want your exercises for your journal having to do with all of your different printed products you're finding. And sketches and brainstorming for your concept. I want you to document your digital process. 2 polished large-scale presentations of your final artwork. Same image, 2 different color palettes. And I want you to demonstrate and communicate to me how the color impacts the message. So I want you guys to start talking about the language that we're learning here in class, talk about the design elements and how they're affecting your work, because you have to learn how to start talking about it. Design narrative, and then everything is one PDF with your evaluation checklist added. And then here are some questions that you guys should be prepared to answer about your artwork during critique. Why did you choose this subject? What is the color scheme and why is it appropriate? Did you use local or arbitrary color and why? How is the typography integrated into the image? And any kind of problems you had, yada, 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 okay? Questions? So I would do this assignment in Illustrator because it gives you the ability to change the colors really easily without having to rework anything in Photoshop. So let me show you some student work. All right, so this student found her color palette and she chose Tim Gunn from Project Runway. I love that show. You guys ever notice? Oh, I guess it doesn't work in this class anymore. Thursday nights was when I used to teach, and I'd get home at like 10:30, and Project Runway would be on, and I just like, yes, until I fall asleep. Okay, so Tim Gunn, and you can see she's starting to sketch some ideas, and she's thinking about the typography. And for this student in particular, she really wanted to play around with this like handmade look, because that's what, you know, the creative process is like when you're sewing. You can see integrating like little stitches and safety pins. And then using his signature phrase, make it work. So she took this image of Tim Gunn and traced him out. and then started playing around with filling him in with color. I think he looks like Elton John here. Does anybody else agree? He starts to change immediately, right? And then the cooler color palette. Played around with incorporating some different little icons in there for some more texture. So the student wrote out their typography. You don't have to do it this way. You can use a font. And then traced it in Illustrator, just like how you would a photograph. And then played around with placement. And these are the two different final pieces. So you can see how there's a huge difference in the feeling between the two different color palettes, right? So this student used a photograph, and they colored it in Photoshop. And you can see the different process. They didn't incorporate all of their sketches and stuff, but I wanted to show you guys how the sepia tone and this arbitrary color scheme had a completely different feel. This student decided to incorporate some texture, probably because after her texture assignment, she saw some cool options. But again, you can see this is a really nice cool color palette. This is John Muir. And then this warmer one. And how it just transforms the feel. So I want you guys to have fun with this and play around and, you know, experiment with all these different color palettes. And I always like to see if you have a huge range, I always say, show me the shit. Show me the stuff you don't like. So if you have stuff that's just not working, take a screen capture and show it to me. And talk about why is this not working? Why is it not turning out the way you want? And what did you do to change that to make it the design that you wanted and you envisioned? Okay. So there's more student work that you guys can click through and get some ideas about. But I'm going to show you a little trick that you guys can use to start to play around with finding a font that you really like to incorporate in your design. I'm not going to show you step by step how to create the poster because you guys have those skills now. You know how to create shapes and fill them in with color in Illustrator. You know how to set up a document in Illustrator to be 11 inches by 17 inches large. You know how you can then place everything in an InDesign document. But I want to show you some tips on how you can play around with font and typefaces, and so you can see a huge range of options to play with. I'll launch this too. Have you guys already launched your design software? Okay. So InDesign has finally launched. Do you guys know how to clean up your workspace in InDesign when it's all messy and you have panels all over? Okay, what you can do is you can go up to Essentials and you can reset your Essentials. And this is going to give you a workspace that is just in this preset Essentials mode. There are other modes that you could choose to work with. So typography, book, advanced, and it gives you a different set of options for your setup. But all of these are available to you under the window menu. So it's not like they're not available to you, it's just however you want to work. I like to try to work clean and tuck my panels away. Same thing with Illustrator. If it's a little bit messy, you can reset it. It's just like if you're in any kind of work environment, you want it to be kind of clean before you get started. Okay, so I'm just gonna open up a new document in InDesign, and you can do the same thing in Illustrator. It really is just whatever you have a preference of working in. Just gonna do it 8.5 by 11. Okay. Can somebody give me a word?
Sunshine.
Sunshine. Thank you. That's perfect. So I'm going to create a text box. Typed in sunshine. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here. Let's do 30. And I'm going to duplicate this text box by holding down the Alt or Option key and clicking and dragging. Then what I like to do is actually go through my fonts in my font family drop-down menu and start to look at different options that I think might work. So this is a typewriter one. If it's too small, if your type box is too tiny, so the whole word or the paragraph can't fit, you get this little red box and it says warning. So sometimes if you have type it's called overset text, if you have this happen with a large paragraph, this is a good warning symbol to look out for because you might be missing a sentence or a word. All right, so then let's try this one. Let's see. Let's try this marker. So you can see with a word like sunshine, I can be a little bit more playful. We can choose a font that looks like it's made out of like a hand lettered or a marker type. Maybe we can play around with a cursive, which is also known as a script font. And you can see how something like this Mesquite Pro, which is like a kind of a Western look, you can see how this look is completely different than one of the other options. So you have to pick a font that's going to contribute to your overall design message. Let's see. Okay, so that's how I run through. And you can do this same technique and you can add this as a screen capture to your process. So I can see what kind of fonts you chose to use. So I'm going to show you guys a fun website. If you go to flippingtypical.com, I may have showed you guys this already, it will show you all of the fonts that are installed on your machine.
I discovered something about this.
Yeah.
It uses Flash to read the fonts on your system,
Uh-huh.
and Flash is going to be deprecated in the near future, and this may stop working.
Oh, okay.
I love it. I use it all the time.
Well, hopefully they'll figure out a different, option. But what you can do is you can type in your word, and you can see all of the different fonts on your machine and how they look different, and then you might be able to choose one that you really want by looking at this first. So let's see. Load more. But that's something that you guys can play around with. It's kind of fun. Okay. Is there anything else in InDesign that you guys want to have me go over? Any InDesign questions? Okay. So there's one more thing I wanted to mention to you guys. The evaluation checklist, I've gone over this probably 4 or 5 times already, but it never gets old. You have to download it to your machine and fill it out in Adobe Acrobat Pro. You can't fill it out in your browser and then save it. Yes, Gurdon.
When I fill it out in Acrobat Pro,
Uh-huh.
and I enter fields like say yes or no, it saves that, and I don't know how to figure it out. So I have sometimes I'll have 3 fields checked because I don't know.
Oh, I think that's just issue. You mean the radial buttons?
Yeah.
The little buttons, right? I think it's just an issue in that particular file. Like the radio buttons aren't working properly. But in terms of like typing your name or filling in the numbers for that grading rubric, because I want you guys to self-grade, that you guys should be able to edit. No, I want you guys to, I want you to take it seriously and use them, but if you have like a point where like maybe you checked a couple extra, maybe make a note for me or something. And you know, so that you don't have to start over, but I'm not too worried about that part as much. Any other questions about that? Okay. So let's look at your exercise for tonight. John?
Yeah.
We've had this problem before.
I think it's a Flash movie. If it's an FLB, that's why.
Okay. So if this video doesn't show up for you guys on these machines, you can play the video from here. So what you're going to do for this exercise is you're going to watch the video, okay? And you're going to go to this link, which talks about resizing images in Photoshop. Okay. And then you're going to follow the instructions. There's also some information down here about high resolution images and stuff. And then you're going to follow the instructions by locating a high resolution royalty-free image on the web. So what I like to do is just make a search here for high resolution royalty-free images.
Also, there's a bunch of them in the index.
Yeah, totally. Ooh, someone just told me about a new stock website. I'll have to remember what that is. All right, so then you guys can click around and you can kind of see if you find anything. But the trick is you have to kind of look at the dimensions in pixels. So 820 by 540, not so high resolution. Let's see.
I know Google lets you sort by sizes and
Yeah.
option too.
In the search tools here.
The usage rights too.
Yeah, exactly. So you can find a size.
The truth is, it doesn't really matter what size the image is for the exercise.
Shh.
I mean,
You stinker. Okay, so this one's really big. This is 3900 by 2613. Okay, so this is a large image. So if I go to view image, it's going to give me this big guy right here. Right? So then you can download it, save the image to your machine, because you're going to open it in Photoshop. So what you also need to do is you need to hang on to the URL for the image. So on this page right here, when I clicked on this, it came with this URL. So make sure you save that as well, because you're going to need that, because we're going to go and double check. But what you do is you follow the instructions and you do this little routine here where you look at the image size in Photoshop and you can play around with it, and the video has the instructions for you. And then you're going to download this little PDF form and you're going to fill it in. URL for the image, yada, yada, yada. But you want to make sure you save this to your machine first and then open it in Acrobat so you can fill it in. Does that sound good? Any questions? Yes, no, yes, no. John has a question or a statement.
well, about that form. If you're doing work for people and they want you to put a form on the web, don't ever put a PDF like this on there, because people will open it in their browser, fill it out, save it, and lose everything they filled in. And then they'll come to you and start chewing you out because of it.
They're going to chew you out.
They're going to chew you out anyway.
They're
It's
just going
always
to chew
your
you out.
fault.
Okay, so if we don't have any questions, we have about 10 minutes before Tom arrives. So you guys can get up, use the restroom, whatever, then you're going to settle in for his talk, which will be about like an hour, and then we'll take our break. Does that sound good? Okay, great.